Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. Welcome back, Brewer fans, to another edition of the Brew Crew Review Podcast. I am your host, Vince Trovato, and I am joined here on the set by the one and only great man himself, Mr. Scott Bartell. How are you today, Scott?
Doing great, Vince. Do you know, is anybody else joining us today for this episode? I know a lot of people have been kind of down about the Brewers lately. Hopefully they're not too depressed.
Well, as our longtime listeners know, Scotty, we've got two other podcast co-hosts, one of which is Mr. Craig Mueller, and the other is Mr. Chad Collins. I did talk to Craig earlier today. He unfortunately is not able to join us. He is up at Lambeau Field, the home of the Green Bay Packers, working an event. You know, we are very much in demand as media personalities. So Craig is up at one of his favorite places on earth, Lambeau Field. So we all know that Craig is a diehard Brewers and Packers fan. So he's up at Lambeau for an event with the Green and Gold today, unable to join us. And I think you talked to Chad Collins. Is he joining us today, Scott?
I do not believe that he is. I'm not sure what he's doing exactly. He said he was going to State Fair, and I was like, State Fair isn't actually there yet. You're not going to be able to go and drink there yet. It's not even going on yet. And he's like, well, there's no better time to practice. So I don't know.
Maybe did he mention it as being Wisconsin State Fair? Maybe he's going to a different state fair.
That's possible. Maybe he meant county fair. I don't know.
It's hard to keep track. He likes church festivals, county fairs, state fairs, country fairs, whatever. He's a definite fair guy, but I'm sure he'll be sending us some live updates from whichever state's fair that he's attending, and we will report that to you, Brewer fans, as soon as we are in receipt of his communication. So, okay, well, we'll proceed on today here. Scott, let's just jump right into it. The Brewers didn't play a ton of games here in the last week since our last podcast because, of course, it was the All-Star break. We will get into the Dodgers series here in just a second. But let's talk about the All-Star game first. And as Brewer fans, I'm sure, are well aware, the Brewers were very well represented at the game. We had 5 All-Stars for the first time in franchise history. Josh Hader, Jeremy Jeffers, Christian Yelich, Lorenzo Cain, and Jesus Aguilar were all selected to take part in the All-Star game this year held in Washington, D.C. As we mentioned, first time that 5 guys have been chosen in franchise history. There were 5 other times in franchise history where 4 guys had been selected for the team. So this was just set a new record for the Brewers. All the Brewers got into the game, and some had great performances. We saw Christian Yelich hit a home run in the All-Star game, which was great. Jesus Aguilar, I believe, was 0 for 2. We saw Lorenzo Cain play a solid defense. There was, some highs and some lows. And we should also mention Jesus Aguilar was, of course, in the home run derby, and unfortunately he was eliminated in the first round. But it was great to see a Brewer in the derby itself. And then we've got Josh Hader. Hader, was brought into the game and did not pitch well in the All-Star game. I think he'd be the first to tell you that. But, of course, what was more concerning to Brewer fans, baseball fans, and the public generally were some unfortunate tweets that came out while the game was being played, and of which the national media really focused on after the game was done. The game resulted in an 8-6 American League victory over the National League, but unfortunately, the big story became Hader's tweets. Scott, what were your initial thoughts about the tweet situation and the reaction both in Milwaukee and really around the country to the tweets themselves?
Well, there's a lot here to unpack, but I'm going to say this. We were both online tweeting about the All-Star game when all of this stuff started getting, dug up and released. And it was very interesting to follow in real time. And I know the first time I started seeing some of some of the tweets getting retweeted and things like that from some of the stuff that he said back in like 2010 or 11. I was a little bit taken aback, and I thought, nah, this isn't him. And then I thought maybe this is his account getting hacked. But then I realized that, yeah, no, these tweets are all like, 6, 7, 8 years old. And so that's when things got a little bit weird because, well, I have to lead off by saying, yeah, all the stuff that he said was wildly inappropriate and not good as a whole. But also the fact that it's like 7 years old, you'd like to think that there's kind of a little bit of a statute of limitations on idiocy. Hader, ever since he's been a Brewer, to the best of my knowledge and everyone else around me and any other affiliates, including we still have a couple inside sources here, Tom Carter being one of them.
Our anonymous inside source, Tom Carter.
Yeah.
I don't think we can't say his name on the air though. If you remember, Scott, it's supposed to be because I got yelled at about this from him a few weeks ago.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Our anonymous source, Tom Carter, said, "Don't say my name, Tom Carter, on the air. Say either T Carter or Tom C, or just we have an anonymous source. So let's keep it at that."
Yeah, that's true. I will say, okay, yes, absolutely, totally anonymous. We have anonymous sources inside. The Milwaukee Brewers still.
Tom.
And I won't mention any of their names. I won't mention Tom Carter's name anymore either. But with that being said, everybody said this guy's a stand-up guy ever since he's been with the organization, and all these tweets and stuff. He wasn't even drafted yet by the time that happened, and then it wasn't a problem for his organization after that because none of it surfaced, and now all of a sudden he becomes a Brewer and it happens to get dug up while he's on the mound pitching the first All-Star game of his life, of hopefully many more All-Star games. And it's just an unfortunate situation. Now, I'm not saying that Hader's blameless, far from it. He definitely, deserves some kind of, being reprimanded in some way. But it still sucks that somebody would go out there and say, hey, I'm going to, help tarnish this guy's reputation at the at potentially the biggest moment of his career so far. So that's a pretty fair perspective. I think there's obviously the things that were said were truly awful, and it's there's no sugarcoating the words that were used on a guy's social media feed, and you'd certainly like to think that number one, a guy's not thinking of those thoughts, and number two, that you are gonna at some point go back and be smart enough to clean up old social media posts that reflect poorly upon you as a human being. And I think that in and of itself is something the Brewers are going to have to take a look at and go back and really look at what they can do to make sure that there isn't these situations that develop, I guess, on social media. It's a new day and age for teams dealing with this. It's not something that happened a generation ago because it was prior to social media. That being said, you hit a couple of points really well there, Scott. I think that Hader's, I'm hoping at least, grown up a lot in the last 7-8 years since the tweets were made. He did apologize profusely to the clubhouse and his teammates. And the one thing that really does stick out to me is the fact that his teammates so strongly came out to defend him. And that included, very much to me at least, the team leader, Lorenzo Cain, who is himself obviously an African American guy, and I think that does show that at least the current iteration of his character, meaning Josh Hader's, is hopefully better than it was when he was 17 years old, and they take a look at this as a true learning opportunity to move forward. You play Major League Baseball, you're going to be playing with a diverse set of teammates, and that's the reality of the situation, and he's got to come to grips with what he said, but he also has to live with these guys and play baseball with them on a daily basis. And you'd like to think that a guy isn't pretending when he's out there with his teammates every day as being a good teammate. So I think that there was definitely, at least I'm hoping, some personal growth. I don't think any of us really know Josh Hader as a human. So we're looking at this from the outside, but I would hope that, this situation can, be a learning
experience for both him and for the Brewers generally.
Yeah, for some reason, like I picture like this weird scenario. Like, I mean, imagine Hader doesn't even know what's going on, and then he has to he figures it all out. Like, I'm sure somebody got in his ear like once he got off the mound at the All-Star game, and by the time the All-Star game ended, the cameras are everywhere, and
Right.
they already have all the national press there because it's an All-Star game. It's not a regular Brewer game.
Right.
So that obviously it gets 100 times more exposure. I do want to say that I guess I really like the way that the Brewers media or PR team or damage control team, whatever it is, I really like the way that the organization as a whole handled it, which was the first thing they did was Hader owned it. Like, there's so many things that people could have said, oh, my account was hacked. Oh, well, that was a long time ago. Oh, I don't think that way anymore. He owned it. Like, he just said, this is what I did. This is what I said. This is not who I am anymore. And he apologized profusely for it. Great job. I also really like the, act of solidarity when he actually goes out and gives his, his press conference, that all the Brewers, join him at that press conference in sort of an act of support. That was really nice as well. And yeah, I think that the Brewers may have just wrote the playbook for every other organization on how to deal with situations like these, because they're going to happen. This is like one of the first major ones I've actually seen with social media. It will not be the last, of course.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And practically speaking, in terms of Brewers stuff, this is not going to result in any loss of playing time for Josh Hader. He has not been suspended by Major League Baseball or the Milwaukee Brewers. He is going to voluntarily go to sensitivity training. He has already attended one session, according to the Brewers, and I think that is probably about as far as it will go, just the sensitivity training. I'm sure there'll be a few more sessions, and then he has addressed his teammates both internally and then the media, as a whole, in a press conference in Miller Park yesterday, or 2 days ago now. And I think that, legally speaking, there's only so much that baseball can do, because he did these things prior to him being in a contractual relationship with any Major League Baseball team. He also, has not really shied away from owning up to this, like you said, and he is voluntarily essentially taken on these sensitivity training courses. So I think that Hader is doing and saying all the right things, and I think that the Brewers as an organization and his teammates most definitely have done and said all the right things. And I'm very hopeful that, this situation can essentially resolve itself by never happening again. And, there is going to be a few more ramifications, and I think you're going to see it next week, this upcoming weekend, when the Brewers go on the road for the first time since these tweets came out here after the All-Star break. So it will be a continuing issue for the 2018 Brewers as they go, around the league on the road in the second half of the season. And for a guy like Josh Hader, who's a young guy, only in his second big league season, it's something he's really going to probably have to live with to a varying degree throughout his career. So how do you think that the reaction is going to be when the Brewers go on the road to San Francisco this weekend?
Yeah, it should be interesting. I'm sure, I'm sure he's going to get heckled a lot more than he was, because I don't think that there were a lot of fans out there that genuinely disliked him. But I think there probably are now. So there's going to be some of that. I also thought it was interesting the way the Brewer fans welcomed him back. I was listening to the game. I was not there, but from what I saw anyway, it certainly looked like the majority of the crowd cheered for him. I didn't hear any boos. I'm sure there were some, but pretty overwhelmingly, the majority there was cheering for him. A few people stood and clapped, and Craig did mention that he wanted me to say on this podcast that I should probably get the quote right, he disagreed with the Brewer fans standing ovation for Josh Hader in that respect. And I think this is open to interpretation. I'm sure Craig's looking at it and saying, no one should probably get a standing ovation for saying the things that Josh Hader said. But I don't believe that that's what Brewer fans were standing and cheering for. This is just a great act by loyal fans that were saying, like, hey, like, Josh Hader, you're a Brewer. Like, you're a part of this fabric, or the fabric of this community. You're a part of Wisconsin. And whatever you did back when you were in some other state with some organization, like, we're looking past that because that's not what you did while you were here. We are going to judge you on what you do while you're here, on and off the field. And he hasn't done anything off the field, and he's been phenomenal on the field. So I think that that's kind of what they were doing there. But I'm sure every fan has their own interpretation.
Yeah, and I thought a lot about that today too, Scott, that reaction when he came to the game for the first time last night. And, you know, I go back and forth. I think that you're right. I don't think that the average Brewer fan was standing up and saying, we love those tweets. I think far from it. I don't think it was an indicator that Milwaukee fans are, supporting very much a abhorrent view on, race relations and things. I don't think that was it. I think it is what you said. I think that it was, supporting a guy who, in their minds, probably, had been really, chastised, probably rightfully so, in the national media this past week, and that they were showing him that they still had his back in some ways. I thought about what I would personally do if I would have attended the game. I would not have stood up and clapped. I don't think I would have gone that far. I think I wouldn't have booed. I think I would have just reacted like I would have at any Brewer pitching change. And I think, I don't know if everyone's right, has the right to do what they want to do, and they're at the game, obviously. I just think that, for me at least, I wouldn't have stood up and given him a standing ovation, in that sense. I think I would have just, waited for him to make his appearance and cheered at probably after his first strikeout because I want the Brewers to win. But yeah, I don't think I would have given him a standing ovation myself.
I don't know. I'd like to think if I was there, I probably would have stood. I probably would have clapped. I wouldn't have cheered, and I wouldn't have clapped loudly or anything like that. And it would almost be like a kind of a somber thing, like, I don't know, like just sort of like regretful, but
right.
It's sort of like, I don't know, like picture if a Major League Baseball player, like a different player or whatever, had like a close relative, like something happened to them like the day before and he came out then. Like I'd probably give a clap to just say like, hey, we're recognizing what happened and what we're going through. But I don't know. It's just difficult to break it down like that, I guess.
It is, yeah, and you really can't get into, what an individual fan is thinking. Some people just react when there's a lot of noise, and some people are, very much putting thought into it and stood and clapped, and some people thought long and hard about it and decided not to. I think that that's every fan's right. They're the ones buying the ticket and being there. So interesting times. Certainly we wish the Brewers and their bullpen and Josh Hader continued success on the field. And I think that, if Hader is able to continue to say the right things and continue to build up a strong relationship with his teammates of, all backgrounds and also continue to take the sensitivity training and, of course, continue to put up big numbers, I'm sure Milwaukee will continue to support him. And hopefully, again, he has matured a lot as a person since, when he was 17. So
I heard also, by the way,
go ahead.
That, I also heard that he was going to do some kind of a thing now where he's going to talk to like our minor league affiliates and, speak to our younger players and even the people that were newly drafted and just kind of go over the pitfalls of social media and stuff like that. So maybe there will be a little bit of positivity out of all this.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that it should be pointed out that, again, this isn't something he is mandated to do. He's not fighting something for Major League Baseball. something he's choosing to do, and skeptics may say it's simply because he wants to improve his public image, and maybe that's somewhat true. But I also think that he at least seems from the outside very legitimately contrite about what happened, and that he wants to essentially make amends for his poor decisions, years ago. And I applaud him for stepping up to the plate and taking responsibility for that. So in any event, we do have to look at the pivot here and look at let's look a bit at the week that was and the week that will be here for Brewers baseball on the field. As mentioned, of course, it was the All-Star break most of last week, so the Brewers were essentially off except for our All-Stars until Friday night, where the Brewers opened up a 3-game set against the Los Angeles Dodgers. We're taping this here on Sunday night following the Brewers' lopsided loss today, 11-2 loss today to the Dodgers. Brewers lose 2 of 3 in the series. We did manage to beat the Dodgers and Clayton Kershaw somehow on Saturday night, which of the 3 games of the series would probably be the one that most fans would have least expected us to win. Scott, what are your thoughts on coming out of the break and going 1-2 in our 3-game set against the Dodgers at home at Miller Park?
What's our record at the time of taping? I should probably know this.
You've got an intern, Crystal. Ask her to check it out.
They're giving it to me.
Our record right now is 56-45, so we're 11 games over 500 after today's loss to the Dodgers.
So, considering that, I believe we would actually still barely make the playoffs as a wild card if the season were to end today. We're 11 games over 500, and we're probably, hopefully, looking to make a move to trade deadline to bolster this team a little bit. And having said all of those wildly positive things, I don't know if I've ever heard of any team with a record like that at this point of the season, with morale so low, both by I assume by the team and definitely with the fan base. So I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot to be positive about, but man, this is the worst possible time to be doing this right before the trade deadline. Because if I'm Stearns right now, if I even make a deal to upgrade this team, I'm not doing it until July 31st. Because as it stands now, we're fading so fast that I don't I wouldn't be grabbing any kind of a rental player or anything like that. He's basically probably going into this now saying, is this a trade I would make in the off season to make our team better in 2019? If it doesn't make 2019 better, that team better, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that in the second half of our podcast here later on this week. But I do think that you're right about the morale. If the season ended if the season we've got 60-some games left. Right now, if the Brewers finish 500 the rest of the season, we are going to finish with 87 wins, which may or may not get us into the playoffs. It would be really on the bubble, I think, and certainly wouldn't be enough to win the division against the Cubs. So you really have to question, what our priorities should be at the deadline. And I think on our second half, we'll get into that a little bit more, but, certainly the value of a rental comes down, and the value of guys that could be, here for a few seasons, maybe under a contract-controlled scenario, are going to go up, if anything. So that'll be interesting in our second half, so stay tuned for that. Getting back to your points about the morale, I've been a Brewers fan since the day I was born, and I've managed to see many seasons of losing baseball and a few seasons of winning baseball with the Brewers. But, Scott, I was thinking about this. I really can't remember a kick to the gut, a gut punch like what we've seen over the past 10, 11, 12 days of Brewers baseball. Between the losses were 1-10 in our last 11 games, and the awful way that a few of the games in Miami and Pittsburgh ended before the break, and then the hater news over the All-Star game. It's just been one thing after another for this team, losing out on the Manny Machado sweepstakes. So going back a number of years, I was born in 1981, so we're going back to the early 80s at this point, and I really cannot remember another stretch of games that have been so disheartening for a franchise as this past, essentially 2 weeks have been. After coming off of a high, we had taken 3 out of 4 from Atlanta at home, and things were rolling at that point. So I don't know what happened, but it seems to be more than just a bad stretch of baseball at this point. I was hoping that they were going to come out of the break firing on all cylinders, and we lose a series to the Dodgers. Get just crushed in one of the games. It's been very frustrating. And some people are pointing to last year and 2014 as perhaps other similar examples, and we did have collapses in both of those seasons. But last year nobody expected us to contend, including David Stearns and Craig Counsell. I was not as emotionally invested or upset, I guess, about last year. I think just because everything that we did earn was gravy. The fact that we were eliminated with 1 game to go remaining in the season was a bit of a gut punch, of course, but it wasn't as bad as this collapse, I don't think. And just because nobody expected us to be there in the first place. In 2014, it was kind of smoke and mirrors. We played really, really well in April and May of that year, and then we were 500 for a couple months, and then we just had an awful September. But I think if you were watching that Brewers 2014 team in July of that season, that you wouldn't have said this is a playoff team. Whereas if you were watching the Brewers as late as July 8th, would have said this is a team that not only is a playoff contender, but has legitimate aspirations to win a World Series if you get maybe one more arm and a middle infielder. And now, if you're watching this team that showed up against the Dodgers or the Marlins or the Pirates in our last 3 series, I don't know anybody that would say that. So it's really confusing. It's like the Brewers are playing Jekyll and Hyde with the fans in some ways with this team. I know every team goes through, a week or two of bad baseball, but this just seems so bad that it's really hard to put a positive spin on it. What are your thoughts, Scott?
So I guess I was trying to figure it out, like over the course of the last, I'll even go back a month. Over the course of the last month, like what is different with this team? And unfortunately, like, believe it or not, the pitching is still there. Today is probably a bad example of that, but the pitching is definitely still there, although we are definitely starting to see cracks in the armor, so to speak. I mean, Knebel and Hader have both, had innings or high leverage innings where they've given up runs and ultimately kind of cost us a game. And I know Taylor Williams has not been himself the last few times he's been out. But
and Corey Knebel, to your point, has been incredibly unreliable to me this season and very, very frustrating. Even games that he's managed to lock down the save have not been easy saves. We are definitely missing the Corey Knebel of 2017, who was just utterly dominant.
Yeah, he is really having a hard time locating that fastball right now, it seems like. And there's also been times, not as often, I guess, where if he can't get the curve over, they're just going to sit fastball and just wait. And he's getting behind in the counts, and people are just content to just sit there and say, I'm not swinging until this guy throws strikes, and he doesn't. And so then all of a sudden you're tying on your go-ahead runner already on base, and boy, that's the rest.
And he's walked a batter or two. And, Corey Knebel was put into that closer's role partially because of the trades, but also because, he's essentially got 2 pitches. And as a 2-pitch pitcher, you can get away with that for an inning. You can't get away with that for multiple innings or as a starter. So I think Knebel was moved to that because his 2 pitches that he did have, he was able to locate. And the curveball is just utterly such a dominant pitch that when it's on, it's spot on. And that's what we saw in 2017. This year, like you pointed out, I think you're absolutely right. The rest of the league has adjusted and said, all right, well, if you can't get that curveball across every single time, we can just sit on your fastball, and any major league hitter eventually is going to be able to time a fastball, especially after they've seen him for a year or two in the league. And I think, unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And Corey kind of knows it. His command, even with the fastball, is off. He's walking a lot of batters. He occasionally comes back, and he's got that curveball that can work once in a while. And when he gets to work, he's still brilliant. And then next batter walks him, and the next batter hits a home run on the fastball. So it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, but really the real problem that we have is still the offense. Like, the offense is not picking up the slack. And when you look at it right now, not counting the pitcher, of course, there's 8 position players out there in our batting order any given day. 3 of them were just selected to the All-Star team. So you would think that our offense wouldn't have any kind of a problem. And yet, here we are. And over the course of the last month, Christian Yelich is the only Brewer that's hitting over 277. So
yeah, Kane has been in a bit of a slump, but like you pointed out, let's look at the whole season. And we have had some injuries, and that should always be pointed out. But so does every other team. And I think that bottom half of the order is just anemic. We cannot continue to thrive with a team that's got Hernan Perez, some combination of Hernan Perez and Brad Miller and Eric Kratz, or even Manny Pena, hitting 5 through 8, followed up by a pitcher, followed up by, a top of the order that has been good, but they're going to go through their slumps as well, using Kane as an example. And I think that it's like half the guys, if not more, in our lineup are just literally almost automatic outs. It's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know. It's been frustrating to watch this offense. There's been so many times where you just think that they're just one hit away from having a big inning, and it just doesn't happen. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully things turn around a little bit. But as far as everything else, it seems like maybe they're striking out a little bit more, maybe they're walking a little bit less. But overall, there hasn't been that much change over the last month between that that Brewer lineup and the one we trotted out their opening day. So it's just a matter of just hopefully getting to fire on all cylinders, and they say hitting's contagious and all that fun stuff. Let's hope so.
As bad as and you're right on it. And as bad as this stretch has been, the Brewers are still somehow 8-11 in the month of July. So it hasn't been a completely awful month looking at it in its totality. We could, in theory, still finish over 500 on the month, which would be a minor miracle at this point. So I think that in terms of short-term goals, that's really what the Brewers need to be looking at is, trying to salvage as much as they can of the remaining, week and a half of this month and trying to finish over 500 in July. To that point, the Brewers are going to be facing the Washington Nationals at Miller Park for 3 games starting tomorrow. They then go on the road, and they will be starting a 4-game set against the San Francisco Giants in San Francisco. Scott, how do you think that the Brewers are going to fare this week against the Nationals and the Giants?
I really hope that we wind up playing the I don't know. See, the Nationals are a weird team. The Nationals have all the talent in the world, and their record isn't showing it right now. They've had a lot of problems with injury. But I actually – and Bryce Harper's been slumping. He's still getting the homers, but he's still only hitting around 220 or something. So I think we can actually hopefully turn this around. I don't see why we can't take 2 out of 3 for the Nationals. But that trip to the West Coast has been the trip that just dooms the Brewers year in and year out. And so far, we've actually done really, really well against the NL West, and you just have to hope that continues because that's something I'm worried about.
Yeah, fair enough. And some of our listeners know I live out in Washington, D.C., and I do go to a pretty large amount of Nationals games. I usually get out there once, at least once a homestand, usually a couple times. And so I've seen that team a lot, and they do struggle. They are a weird team, like you said. They've got, incredible starting pitching at times from guys like Max Scherzer, who you never want to have to face. But their bullpen, even with some recent upgrades, still hasn't been good. Their offense is really hit or miss, literally. And I'm not as scared of the Nationals in 2018 as I would have been in, 2017, 2016, and a few years in the past year. I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say we're going to take 2 or 3 from Washington. I am not as optimistic about the Giants series. I'll say we're going to be 1-3 out there. So 2-1 against the Nats, and we'll say 1-3 against the Giants. You did make a good point. The Brewers are 12-4 against the National League West this year. So that's great. I think I could be wrong on this. We should have our interns look this up. But I know we've played a series in San Diego, and I don't think we've played yet at all. I know we haven't played in L.A. or San Francisco. I don't know if we've played in Colorado on the road, but certainly we haven't really done our big West Coast swing yet. On the road, we played them at home. So that might be a little bit of a deceiving record. And we were also playing some of those games before a lot of these injuries hit.
Yeah. Boy, I just, I was just looking at it. Now we've had 19 games in July. I think, yeah, you said, we were 8-11 over that stretch. Only
Yep.
5 times have we scored 5 runs or more.
Yeah, no, and that is going to have to change if we want to win, because our starting pitching has been holding down the fort, until today's outing by Brent Suter and a few others, I guess, over the course of the year, but really has been doing an admirable job, and our bullpen has continued to be incredibly solid. So it's, like you said, it's not our pitching for the most part. There's a few blips on that radar, but overall it's definitely the offense. And we'll see. Maybe David Stearns makes a move in the next couple of days and brings in somebody earlier. You just don't know what will happen. But as it stands, I will go with a 2-1 mark against the Nats, and unfortunately 1-3 against the Giants. So I hope I'm wrong. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can split against the Giants and get 2 or 3 from the Nats. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic with that. The Giants might be sellers at the deadline. That might help us out a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, very good. Well, let's hope that the Brewers can turn it around here, and certainly there's the potential there to turn things around and start playing better like we did the first few months of the year, and avoid what all fans are worried about, which is another collapse. So we'll try to think at least somewhat optimistically, and hopefully next time that we tape, we've got good news for you. But in the meantime, I guess we'll just have to see what happens here at home against the Nationals in the next couple of days.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan.
All right. Well, thanks, Scotty. It's been a good conversation. A lot to go over here in a short amount of time. So glad we were able to cover most of it. And thanks to Craig and Chad for their moral support here on this podcast. And Brewer fans, make sure that you tune in. Our next podcast will be out on Wednesday of this week. So make sure you're waiting and listening for that. And in the meantime, go Brewers and stay classy, Wisconsin.
Yes, Wisconsin, stay classy. Don't give up.
Thanks, guys.